There is one woman inside Buckingham Palace who has never needed the spotlight. And right now, that is exactly what makes her the most powerful person in the room. Think about what the British monarchy looked like 5 years ago: a queen still reigning at 95, two princes standing side by side at public engagements, a royal family that, for all its complexity, still projected the appearance of unity. Then think about what it looks like today. A king navigating illness while managing one of the most turbulent chapters in modern Windsor history. A Prince of Wales carrying the weight of an heir's expectations under international scrutiny, and a former senior royal couple whose departure tore a wound in the institution that has never fully healed. Now ask yourself, through all of it, every leak, every tell-all interview, and every front-page crisis and parliamentary question about the family's relevance, who has never once wavered? Not Charles, not William. Not even the late Queen in her final years, who bore every blow with dignity, but could not fully shield the institution from the storms gathering around it. The answer, if you've been paying close attention, is Princess Anne. And right now, in the middle of a renewed firestorm surrounding Meghan Markle's fractured public legacy, the 75-year-old Princess Royal has done something she almost never does. She has spoken, clearly, deliberately, with the kind of ice-cold precision that only comes from someone who has spent 5 decades watching other people burn bridges she quietly refused to build. This is the story of how Princess Anne became the monarchy's last line of defense, how a woman routinely underestimated, overlooked in favor of louder voices and shinier headlines, emerged as the only royal whose moral authority still stands unchallenged, and how the choices made by Meghan Markle, choices that shook 4 continents and dismantled a carefully constructed global brand, handed Anne the moment she never asked for but was absolutely prepared to meet. To understand why Princess Anne's voice carries the weight it does right now, you have to understand what she has built and what she has never wanted. She was born in 1950, the second child of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. She grew up inside an institution that did not, at the time, treat its daughters as its future. The heir was her older brother Charles. The glamour would belong to younger royals as they arrived. Anne was expected to attend engagements, wave politely, and occupy the middle distance of royal life. She was not supposed to define it. She had other ideas. By her mid-20s, Anne had already become a competitive equestrian, representing Great Britain at the 1976 Montreal Olympics. She did not win a medal, but she earned something arguably more lasting, a reputation for going after things that were genuinely difficult, and going after them with no expectation of applause. That reputation never left her. For more than 5 decades, Princess Anne has been, by almost every measurable standard, the hardest-working member of the British royal family. Year after year, the data bears this out. Hundreds of official engagements annually, decades of patronage for Save the Children, an organization she has supported since 1970, a global travel schedule that puts most politicians to shame. She once reportedly quipped that she had no interest in being liked, and she was interested in being useful. This is not a woman performing duty. This is a woman for whom duty is indistinguishable from identity. What makes her particularly remarkable, and particularly relevant to the story we're telling today, is what she has never done. She has never given a tell-all interview. She has never authored a memoir about her private pain. She has never appeared on a podcast to explain her feelings about the family dynamics she has lived inside for 7.5 decades. She has experienced divorce, public scrutiny, the grief of losing her mother, and the sustained pressure of royal life. And through all of it, she has maintained an almost supernatural composure. This is not coldness. People who know her describe an intensely warm, witty, and fiercely loyal woman beneath the public reserve. But what Anne has always understood, what she appears to have understood even as a teenager, is that an institution's dignity is not maintained by its speeches. It is maintained by its silences, by who refuses to fight in public, by who keeps showing up even when the theater burns down around them. And the theater, to extend that metaphor, has never burned quite so dramatically as it has in recent months. Let's talk about the fracture. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle announced in January of 2020 that they would be stepping back from their roles as senior members of the royal family, the announcement landed like a depth charge in still water. The shockwaves are still being felt. What followed that departure was not, as some had perhaps hoped on both sides, a quiet and dignified retreat. It was instead a prolonged and extraordinarily public unraveling, a sustained series of interviews, documentary projects, legal disputes, and media engagements that kept the couple's story alive in the global conversation long after most royal observers expected it to fade. The Oprah Winfrey interview in March of 2021 was perhaps the most seismic single broadcast in modern royal history. Claims of institutional indifference, allegations of racism directed at an unborn child, allegations of mental health support being withheld. Each one landed with enormous force. The palace's responses were measured, careful, and to many observers insufficient. Then came the Netflix documentary, then Harry's memoir, Spare. Each new chapter added more fuel to a fire that the institution seemed either unable or unwilling to fully extinguish. For the royal family, the challenge was not only reputational, it was existential. Because what the Sussexes had introduced into the conversation was something the monarchy had never truly faced before, not at this scale, not in this media environment. They had introduced the narrative that the institution itself was toxic, that it had failed its own members, that the silence and tradition and decorum that had always been presented as strength were, in fact, mechanisms of suppression. Now, in the early months of 2026, that narrative is under pressure of a very different kind. Meghan Markle's post-royal brand has encountered severe turbulence. The lifestyle and media empire she worked to construct, built on the pillars of wellness, social advocacy, and personal storytelling, has come under scrutiny on multiple fronts simultaneously. Commercial partnerships have cooled. Media coverage that was once predominantly sympathetic has grown sharply more critical. Questions about authenticity, financial transparency, and the gap between projected values and observable conduct have moved from the margins of royal commentary into the mainstream. The reversal of fortune has been swift enough to make observers stop and stare. But here is where it gets genuinely interesting. Because the narrative that had always positioned the royal family as the villain in Meghan's story, the cold, unyielding institution that failed to protect her, requires the institution to stay silent. It requires the palace to keep absorbing blows without responding. It requires the royals to be the cathedral and Meghan to be the storm. And that is the narrative that Princess Anne, quietly and methodically, has decided to disrupt. Princess Anne does not hold press conferences. She does not release statements through intermediaries designed to go viral. She does not post on social media. When she communicates publicly, it is almost always through official channels, carefully worded and timed with precision, which is exactly why when she speaks with even a fraction of directness about the family's recent turbulence, the effect is disproportionate to the volume. In recent months, those who study royal communication closely have noticed a subtle but significant shift in the Princess Royal's public posture. Where once she maintained a studied neutrality on matters related to the Sussex departure and its aftermath, and there have now been several carefully calibrated moments of comment, observations about duty, about the nature of royal service, about the difference between performing values and living them. These comments are never explicitly directed at any individual. Anne is too disciplined for that. But their context is unmistakable. In one widely noted address to a charitable organization she has patronized for decades, Anne reflected on what she described as the erosion of the distinction between personal ambition and public purpose. She spoke, without names, about how institutions become vulnerable, not when they are challenged from outside, but when people inside them treat the institution as a platform rather than a responsibility. Her language was measured, her meaning was transparent. In another engagement, when asked by a reporter about the monarchy's relevance in the 21st century, Anne responded with characteristic economy. "The monarchy's relevance," she said, "is not a question we need to answer every morning. And those who do the work answer it by the work. The ones who need to announce their relevance usually don't have any." That line circulated for days, and then there was the moment that brought everything into the sharpest possible focus. During a scheduled royal walkabout in the north of England, Anne paused during an exchange with members of the public who had raised the subject of the Sussex media activity. She did not dismiss the question. She looked at the woman who had raised it, smiled with exactly the kind of warmth that her public image rarely captures, and said, "I think people can generally tell the difference between someone who serves and someone who performs service. It takes time, but they can tell." No press release could have said it more clearly. Here is what we are really watching. Princess Anne's emergence as the monarchy's most credible and commanding voice is not an accident. Yet it is the product of a lifetime of choices made in the opposite direction from the ones that have brought Meghan Markle to this particular crossroads. Where Meghan chose narrative, Anne chose action. Where Meghan chose visibility, Anne chose presence. Where Meghan chose the interview, Anne chose the engagement. Where Meghan chose the streaming platform, Anne chose the patronage. And now, as Meghan's chosen instruments, the media partnerships, the brand collaborations, the personal storytelling, begin to buckle under the weight of heightened scrutiny, the contrast between the two approaches has never been more stark. This is not a story about one woman being better than another. It is a story about two fundamentally different theories of what power is and how it is maintained. Meghan Markle's theory of power is modern, media literate, and in many ways entirely understandable. In the 21st century, story is currency, narrative is influence. The ability to control how you are perceived, to speak directly to an audience, bypassing traditional gatekeepers, is a form of genuine power. Meghan understood this instinctively. She leveraged it brilliantly in the early years of her post-royal career. But narrative power has a structural vulnerability that institutional power does not. It requires constant feeding. It requires a steady supply of story, of drama, of revelation, of grievance and triumph. When the story runs thin, or when the story begins to contradict itself, the audience does not remain loyal to the narrator. They simply move on. And in moving on, they often reassess everything they were told. Anne's theory of power is older. It is slower. It is built not on story but on record, not on what you say but on what you have done, year after year after year, when nobody was watching and nobody was applauding. Her power does not require feeding. It compounds. Every engagement she attends, every patronage she sustains, every crisis she weathers without releasing a statement. Each one adds to a reservoir of credibility that cannot be drained overnight by a bad headline or a failed partnership. This is why, at 75 years old, Princess Anne is more relevant, more respected, and more institutionally powerful than she has ever been. And it is why, as Meghan Markle's constructed narrative encounters its most serious pressure test to date, the most devastating response available to the royal family is not a legal filing or a counter-interview or a palace press release. It is Anne. Simply existing, simply continuing, simply showing up. But let us not reduce this to a simple binary. The story of the monarchy in 2026 is not merely the story of Anne versus Meghan. It is the story of an ancient institution trying to find its footing in a world that is changing faster than any institution is designed to absorb. King Charles III, now into the fourth year of his reign, has made genuine and substantive commitments to reforming royal structures, slimming down the working monarchy, refocusing its charitable and diplomatic work, repositioning it as an institution that earns its place rather than assumes it. His own battles with serious illness have added a layer of urgency and at times vulnerability to a reign that was always going to be defined by transition. Prince William has grown into his role with greater steadiness than many predicted. The early years of his public life were marked by the same drift that afflicts many heirs, the uncertain territory between being too young to lead and too visible to simply wait. But in recent years, William has found his voice on issues he genuinely cares about, from mental health to environmental sustainability, and his relationship with the public has matured considerably. The Princess of Wales, Catherine, continues to occupy a singular position in the royal firmament, beloved in a way that feels less manufactured than almost any other figure in contemporary public life. Her own serious health challenges over the past year humanized her in ways that no communication strategy could have engineered. And in weathering that experience with grace and relative privacy, she reinforced the same message that Anne has been broadcasting for decades. That dignity, in the end, speaks louder than drama. Against this backdrop, the Sussex situation has become something the institution is learning to frame differently. Not as a wound to be healed, but as a chapter to be closed. The energy inside the palace has shifted from reactive defense to forward momentum. There is less appetite for engaging with every new development from California, and more focus on what the working royal family actually does. The patronages, the visits, the quiet diplomatic work that never makes the front page but underpins the institution's genuine purpose. Princess Anne has always been the living embodiment of that purpose. And in a moment when the question of what the monarchy is actually for has never been more openly debated, her example has never been more instructive. So where does this leave us? And Meghan Markle arrived inside the royal family as a genuine outsider, American, biracial, divorced, a successful actress in her own right before she met Harry. She brought with her a different kind of energy, a different kind of ambition, and a genuinely different set of assumptions about what the institution was and what it could be. Many of those assumptions were not unreasonable. Some of her criticisms of the family were, and many honest royal observers would concede this, not entirely without foundation. But ambition and grievance are not a strategy. In a brand built on the promise of personal reinvention, when that reinvention is primarily defined by what you've escaped rather than what you're building, carries within it the seeds of its own fragility. Princess Anne, by contrast, has never had to reinvent herself. Not because her life has been without complexity, it has not, but because her identity was never constructed around performance. It was constructed around function, and around showing up, doing the job, and letting the record accumulate without editorial interference. And now, as 2026 moves deeper into its first quarter, the record is being read. Not just Meghan's record, the monarchy's record, the record of a family that, for all its faults, for all the legitimate criticisms that can be leveled at an hereditary institution in a democratic age, has produced in Princess Anne a figure whose commitment to public service is, by any honest assessment, extraordinary. She has never asked for your admiration. She has simply continued. And in continuing, she has made an argument that no interview can make for you, that no streaming deal can make for you, and that no media strategy, however sophisticated, can manufacture. The argument that some things endure not because they are spectacular, but because they are real. At it there is a line that keeps surfacing in conversations about Princess Anne among the people who have worked with her, who have watched her, who have spent time in her orbit. She doesn't perform integrity, she just has it. That is an increasingly rare thing. In an age of personal branding and narrative management and carefully curated public personas, someone who simply does what they say and says what they mean, without an eye to how it will land or how it will trend, is genuinely unusual. Meghan Markle's story is not yet finished. She is, by any measure, an intelligent, talented, and resilient woman who will not simply disappear because her brand has encountered serious headwinds. Whatever comes next for her will be shaped by choices she makes. Choices about authenticity, about accountability, about whether the gap between the values she projects and the conduct she demonstrates can be narrowed to something credible. Princess Anne's story is, in many ways, already written. It is written in 45 years of charitable work, in Olympic competition, in a travel schedule that would exhaust someone half her age, in a consistency of purpose that has never required a rebrand because it has never departed from its original brief. What this moment, this particular convergence of royal crisis, brand collapse, and institutional reckoning, teaches us is something simple and uncomfortable in equal measure. Legacy is not what you announce. It is what remains when the announcing stops. For Meghan Markle, the question now is whether what remains, when the documentaries are finished and the partnerships have cooled and the narrative has exhausted itself, is something real. For Princess Anne, that question was answered decades ago, and the answer is still showing up, still working, still watching, in that measured and undeceived way of hers, as the institution she has spent her life serving proves, once again, that the quietest voices in the room are sometimes the ones that outlast every storm. The monarchy has survived wars and abdications, political upheaval and cultural revolutions, the loss of empire and the relentless interrogation of its own purpose. It has survived because, in every generation, there has been someone inside it who understood that survival is not a performance, it is a practice. And right now, that practice has a face. It is 75 years old, it rides horses, it travels the world in service of causes that will never trend. It rarely gives interviews, it does not explain itself, and it is, quietly, unmistakably, winning.